It's ad break time. I'm proud to announce that the Beyond Solitaire podcast is sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. Although the Kickstarter campaign for their next game, Hydrologic Cycle, has ended, I'll let you know when you can late pledge. CLGS also continues to offer classes in partnership with Gen Con. Their next course will be Intermediate Role-Playing Game Design with Eloy Lasanta, and it starts on June 19th. I know it will be fantastic. Reports from Eloy's students have been nothing but glowing. And I'll also include a final plug for myself. If you like the show and you want to support it, you can do so by going to patreon.com/beyondsolitaire. Thanks to listeners like you, I've been able to keep upgrading my equipment, subscribing to StreamYard, and more. But for now, let's get on with the show.
Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm very happy to have a special guest on the pod this week. This is Kai Jensen. She is the Chief of Awesomeness at GMT, also known as the Production Coordinator, but we're going to go with Chief of Awesomeness. How's it going, Kai?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing all right. And just to clarify, I'm not joking about the Chief of Awesomeness title.
Oh, no, that was official. That'll be on my business card soon.
I highly approve. You do seem like a Chief of Awesomeness to me. So why don't you talk to us a bit about your work at GMT that has led you to this esteemed title?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, my current position as production coordinator means I'm the interface between the art department, development, and our print factory. And so I'm like the last stop for double checking all components, making sure that what we are claiming is in the box is what we're actually sending off to the printer, and hopefully catching any of those little nuances that need to get corrected before we actually send everything off. That's been a year and a half, 2 years now, almost 2 years. And so I'm working with Jason Carr, who's our head of development, and Justin Martinez, our new art director. And so the three of us, they called us the triumvirate at the last convention. So we are like the secondary layer behind the five guys who initially ran GMT for forever. And so we're stepping in and taking over some of those positions. And our triangle basically is trying to maintain a really high level of quality control, which is kind of a new thing for all three of us. So, the title came up spontaneously in a meeting about a week and a half ago when we were down at the warehouse. And apparently that's a sign that we're doing things well right now.
I would say the GMT stuff has been looking very good, especially in recent months. Y'all have definitely been kicking it up. So I normally think of you as a developer and designer. So how did you end up becoming a production coordinator? What led you to that work?
Oh, that's a roundabout one. Yeah. Well, I've only got one design to my actual credit, and that was a children's game I designed back in 2001 as a homework assignment from my husband. Because he's like, I'm doing design work. I'm going to get published at some point. I need someone to help me with this. Are you in? And I'm like, heck yeah, this sounds cool. So we start throwing around ideas on a game, and I kept saying, well, can we just fix this one thing? Can we just change that one thing? And he's trying to explain to me how that doesn't work, that there's a cascade effect that, snowballs into 8 million little changes. So I wasn't getting it. I've never done this kind of work before. And he says, okay, homework assignment. By the end of this weekend, just knock out a quick little simple game so that you understand what you're trying to design, and then I will help you develop it, and you'll see what's going on in that conversation. So I knocked out this little kids game, and Monday we sit down and look at it. We play the game, and he goes, okay, well, can we just fix this one thing with this problem that we're having? And I'm like, well, you can't just fix this one thing because, oh, you son of a gun, he got me. So it was him saying the just thing. And I was like, all right, now I get it. But it was going through that process and having that light bulb moment that kind of showed me what he was trying to demonstrate that I wasn't understanding. So since then, I was his developer. So I became his sounding board, his idea dump for sometimes just talking things through out loud. Even if I never said a word, just sat there and nodded my head, it was enough for him to work his way through an issue. So we kind of did a lot of the development using both of us. I didn't do it alone. But his design work was always up in his own head. But I imagine it was super handy to have a developer on tap at 2:00 in the morning when you wake up with an idea to roll over and go, hey, elbow somebody and start throwing ideas at them. So in that way, I think we had kind of a unique working relationship. But once the two of us, we stalked GMT. Chad had looked around for a publisher who he wanted to have his games come out with. And he decided it was going to be GMT, and we stalked them at 3 consecutive conventions where we would run demo games, and everybody who played, we said, if you like the game, run up to the GMT booth and tell them about this fabulous game you just played. So at the end of the 3rd convention, we got a message, hey, Roger at GMT wants to talk to you guys. So we got in. Yeah. So they picked up, first game was Combat Commander, which was actually titled Company Commander at the time. And ever since then, any design that he worked on, GMT picked up, and I was working as his designer or developer for those. So in that way, over the 19 years, he and I were kind of a team presenting materials to GMT. So we got to know the principals really well, the art department, all those folks. Chad was pretty easy to work with. And so we just kind of had this reputation of, the two of us came as a package deal. And I have always been a huge nerd when it comes to things like Excel spreadsheets and tracking data. And, so we've gotten into those conversations where you get deep into the weeds on the geek stuff. And Tony had apparently decided years ago, when I retire, I need to replace myself with somebody like this. And so he'd already mentioned to Jean, but they're like, well, we'll never get her. She's happy in her day job, which I was. But the company I was working for got bought out by a national company. And so instead of being small and personable and about the crew and our clients and stuff, it became all about the bottom dollar. And then I was no longer happy in my day job, and I walked without a safety net. I turned in my 2 weeks notice. I said, I'm done. I can't work this way. And I left without a plan, without another job. And so I called Jean up and I said, hey, I know the warehouse weekend is starting on Thursday, but I'm free now. My schedule's totally wide open. I just retired. So I'm going to come down on Wednesday to be a day early. Is it okay if I swing by the warehouse? And Jean's like, what do you mean you're free? I'm like, yeah, I quit my day job because I'm going to call you back. And I got a call from, I don't know if it was Jean or Tony. I think it was Jean called me back and said, hey, I want to hook you up with Tony. We're going to offer you a job.
Yes.
So from my side of things, I just lucked into it. From their side of things, I guess there was some conversation and some pre-planning if I ever became available. So
you walked right into it. They've got you now.
I did. Yep. It was my own fault. But no, I've been absolutely loving it because it's been exactly what I wanted in a job. I work from home. I work my own hours. If I remember to actually cut it off at 40 hours in a week, it would be a slow week. Since I love what I do, I don't really pay too much attention to working the extra hours. I'll work into an evening. If I'm on a hot project, I'll work on the weekends if that's what somebody's schedule comes out to. I don't care. But my job as production coordinator is a whole lot of just fine details and spreadsheets and geeking out on data. And I have built the amount of data that we collect. I have built on what Tony had because I'm curious about our production costs. What does it cost to run safety testing on different size games and stuff? So I'm tracking all that data now that he wasn't, or he didn't have spreadsheets for me. He probably had all that data in his head because that's how he rolls. His amazing memory for all this stuff. But I also, because that doesn't fill 40 hours, I get to dabble. I get to stick my nose into every other department we have, and nobody's booted me out yet. So I'm like, oh, I like rules editing. Throw me a rule set, and they will. I'm like, I kind of like doing graphic stuff too. So I've done a couple of rule books, and I like development. So I stick my nose into the Discord channels where the developers are working, and I ask questions, and I throw out ideas, and I just kind of generally make myself a nuisance in every department we have. And nobody's asked me to back off yet, so I just get to keep doing it.
Sounds like a win to me. So
it's fabulous.
I have so many questions about this. Okay, so what kinds of data do you keep? How do you decide what needs to be tracked in your current role?
What I initially got from Tony is our P500 numbers. We track month to month to show growth, or if we hit a slump on a certain game, we can kind of find out what's going on, kick up some marketing. So he's always tracked all those numbers. And that also tells us, when the game has hit the mark, when we're willing to print it, we've hit the numbers that we need to back it. But I was kind of curious about all the background costs that go into it, and how do they compare across different styles of games? Like a coin game is completely different than something like Unconditional Surrender or Pacific War. So I started up another spreadsheet, and I started tracking all the costs involved for setup, for file transfer, for we do safety testing on every product, because it has to get shipped from overseas to the US, and because we ship stuff to the EU, there's different requirements for all those. So we have to do a huge batch of safety testing. There's all these costs involved in that. So I was like, well, what the heck? So I started a database for that, where I tracked not only the costs, but what the major components of the game are, so that if I've got a new game coming along, I can go find what's similar, and I've got a rough idea of where the safety cost quote should be when they send it to me, because they send me the initial quote and I have to approve it. And every once in a while, they send me one that's a little high or a little low. And I'm like, I can question that now because I have the data to back it up. And so, they send me a quote for a little over 5,000. And I'm like, yeah, but we just did this very similar game for 2,500. Why is the difference? And sometimes they'll be like, good question, I'll get back to you. And sometimes they're like, well, here's the reason. You've got something different in this box. So, so that's been interesting. And I love data.
That is interesting. Okay, so I've talked to a HABA employee before, and I understand like safety testing for children,
Mhm.
but what is there to safety test in a board game for adults?
The burn rate on paper, if it's self-extinguishing. So we have rule books, we have counter sheets, we have player aids, and so those things have to be self-extinguishing. They can't contain certain chemicals. Beyond like the lead testing for children's games and stuff, there's a whole series of other chemicals that they test for on imports. And so they go through and they test samples of all the different papers, the inks, the coating, the laminate on the box. I mean, all that stuff has to be within certain regulations, and like I said, self-extinguishing. And then they test dice. They test the wooden components. If we have plastic components, they have to test those for different chemicals and different melt and burn rates. So it's pretty extensive and surprisingly expensive.
I had no idea about this. So basically, when it boils down to it, you're paying someone to take one of your games and light it on fire.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yep.
kind of an awesome job, though.
I know. Yep. So somebody at the factory gets to light it on fire and then count how long until it puts itself out, and yeah. Yeah. But every game goes through that.
Wow, I had no clue. That's actually, I have had so many games in my house, and I've never even thought about it. That has never even crossed my mind. So yes, paper. Yep. I guess if you light it on fire, it'll burn. But I never really thought beyond that.
Yeah. So yeah, it could be anywhere from like 8 to 12 pages of report on all the different things they did or didn't find in the materials, and the burn and extinguish rates and all that stuff. So I've geeked out and I actually read a couple of those all the way through just to see what they look like. And now I just look at the pass fail page. So I'm like, we passed. We're good.
Okay, so this kind of leads me to another question, which is, you've done tons and tons of development work. So you've spent a lot of time on the other side, right? Like, let's think about how this works graphically. Is the game communicating what it needs to? The components. How has your understanding of that work changed because of the coordination work you do now?
It's a totally different look because from the design and development side, you're looking at what does the game need. And so you're, obviously in that position, more willing to add and add and add to the project. And as a project coordinator, I'm looking at how much can we pare down from what you got? How much of this do you actually need versus what have you got going during development? So if they come and they say, hey, I want 56 cubes of 5 different colors, I'm like, okay, fine, not a big deal. We'll just build that in. But then they come back and they say a little later on, oh, now we need to emboss them. Now I need to have more different colors, and we would need to add more shapes and sizes. I mean, it was like, okay, I have to look at it from the standpoint of, okay, it got priced at the beginning of the project when we had a certain set of known components. During development, that can get added to. Rule books very easily get longer. player aids get added, stuff like that, that some was accounted for at the beginning, but not the volume that they've collected by the end of the process. So then we have to look at, okay, we had an initial price and an initial set of components. I've got a little bit of wiggle room in there, but if I've got to come up on the funding for this, is there any way for you guys to pare back on, what all you've thrown in the box? I try not to do that just because the game needs what the game needs. And I get that, having worked the other side of it. But at the same time, you kind of like, okay, can we trade? Can this extra half sheet of counters that you were looking for, that's for this add-on thing, can we set that aside and maybe add that to an expansion instead? Or, do we need the counters and the cubes? Do we need both, or can we do one or the other? So I have to ask those questions. I'm not necessarily looking to take things away from the designer or to, strip the game of components it needs, but still be aware of the costs at the end of the day. So I ask the questions, and sometimes we're able to work things out where I don't have to take anything from the game, and we can work things in a different way, like not emboss and we can silk screen instead. There's a difference in cost, same net effect for the player. It's really a base difference of shiny or not shiny. It's something that simple will make several dollars worth of difference. But yeah, it's given a totally different perspective on what goes in the box at the end of the day.
That's interesting. Does it change the kinds of questions that you like to ask as a developer? I feel like in previous interviews, you've talked a lot about how, initially your work with Chad and also your work with other designers often involves just asking questions.
Mm.
Why is this here? What is this? Have you noticed that you ask different questions now because of this role?
Yeah. I'm so bad at this. I always want to add, I want to pimp a game. Oh my goodness. First thing we would do anytime we bought a game off the shelf, anything that wasn't something Chad did, even with his own designs, the first thing we would do was like, oh, I want to replace like half these pieces with really cool, expensive pieces, because that's just going to enhance my enjoyment of the game. So there's a little piece of my brain that always wants to be like, is there a little piece here that we can kind of pimp this one out a little bit and put something cool and shiny and a little more expensive in, just for player enjoyment, just because it's more fun to handle that piece than a piece of cardboard. So does it have to be a counter, or can we make it an actual pawn, or whatever, a little castle tower, looks like a rook, or who knows what. So yeah, there's a little piece in my brain that's always looking for one of those to drop in. But again, it's got to go back and look at the budget and say, okay, what was this set up for when we first started? So I'll talk myself off the ledge with that stuff too.
Fair enough. Although, I do like my little shinies as well. So actually, fortuitously today, somebody posted a screenshot of a comment that you put on Facebook in the Homo Ludens Discord, because we were all just having a general chat about P500 and how long that publication cycle takes. And you mentioned that for the games on P500 now, the games that have come out this calendar year spent 30.38 months on P500 from start to finish. It's approximately 2.5 years. So for people, a lot of my listeners are going to know what P500 is, because a lot of us are GMT customers. But just for people who might not know, because they are used to sort of Kickstarter or GameFound, what is P500? And then what goes into that 2.5 year process?
Okay. So P500 is a pre-order process, no funding involved. So you don't hand over any money, but it's just an indication to the company of your interest in a game. And so you can go to the GMT website, you say, hey, I want to pre-order this game. No money changes hands at that point. We're just gauging interest. It's called P500 because it used to take 500 games to have enough funding to go to print. Nowadays, it's closer to 750, but we're not going to change the name at this point. And that funding doesn't happen until just before the game comes back from the printer. And so we put out a warning, hey, there were 1,200 of you who opted in on this game. Heads up, we're going to be running your cards in a couple of weeks. So if you've changed your mind, now's the time to pull that order. There's no penalty involved. You just don't get charged. And that game, instead of getting shipped to you, is going to sit in the warehouse until somebody else orders it. So it's a no harm, no foul, right? And I estimate right now at about 7% drop in orders between the time I send stuff to print and the time that the job comes back and is ready to ship out. So we've got that factored in already. So what that means for you is, yeah, you can pull the trigger P500 that game and wait. The reason that it was 2.5 years is because traditionally we've been taking games earlier in their design development process. We are now looking to tighten that up because we're aware of that just seems an unconscionable long amount of time to sit and wait for a game that you're hot for. So the games that we're going to be adding on to P500 going forward, and we've actually started doing this already, are the ones that are not only designed but in development, which means that the big changes have already happened. We're down to balance. We're down to checking components. We're down to play testing, stuff like that. So it's going to be minor changes, which is a shorter process, and then getting into the art department is the next step, and that's its own little bottleneck, simply because the amount of talent that we have on tap is not infinite, and I wish it were. We have some amazing people doing artwork for us, but it seems like there's always another project right around the corner. These guys never catch a break. There is no pause between projects. But I would like to get to the point where the bottleneck is, like, we've got so many good games that are just wrapping up development that we're able to put them up. We get the interest in them, go. They were that close to being done. We can just start moving them straight into artwork instead of having to wait. Some of that delay too is, there's been an unusual number, I think, in the last several years of developers and designers with real life issues. We've had people in car accidents, strokes, heart attacks, cancer, loss of spouse for several of us, that has had an impact on getting games over the finish line. So there's always going to be that reality, but taking games that are early in the design process instead of actually in development, I think, has been part of what has really stretched that time period out. Did that answer?
Interesting. Yeah. So, okay, I have to make sure I understood this correctly. So, P500 no longer means that if it gets to 500 games, it's getting printed. It's a higher number now, technically, because of the needs of the company.
Because of the cost of printing and shipping.
Yeah.
Yeah. But to be honest, most of the games that get to 500 within a certain get to 750 pretty soon thereafter. Especially like for a dedicated series, like something like Coin. The people who are in on Coin, they just auto order. And so, for those who don't know, there's a system on the GMT website where you can simply say, I want to order automatically anything by X designer or in X system. And you just mark that down. And when the game goes on P500, your order just automatically rolls in, and you can check that on your account that it automatically pre-ordered for you. And you can change your mind and drop that off at any time.
That is awesome. I actually did not know that, and now I'm gonna go cost myself so much.
Oh yeah, it's a dangerous system to get into.
Oh man, and this also makes me want to know. Okay, so I feel like P500 has been used as a way of gauging interest, but if you're not putting games on the P500 until you have already invested significantly more in them, do you think that is going to? Obviously, it's good for the consumer because when you put in for a game, you want it quick. But how is GMT mitigating the risks on the company end, given that you might then have invested significant resources in something that will languish on P500?
That would be a question for Jason Carr. To be honest, I know what we're looking for are games that have gotten some development outside of our team stepping in to do anything with the game. So, at that point, there really wouldn't be any outlay for GMT. We wouldn't have been paying a developer ahead of time significant hours without tracking that and knowing that it was going to be something within a range that we're okay with. How Jason and his team do that, I don't know. They're kind of like magic behind the curtain thing to me right now. I just stick my nose in and play in their department. So, Jason, you would definitely want to sit down and talk to Jason.
Yeah, I did, but now I got to have him back because this is like a new set of questions to annoy him with.
Yep. And he's just fascinating to talk to. He knows so much about so many different aspects of our industry beyond what I track. So yeah, always fun to chat with.
Absolutely. And so I also noticed that you were saying in your comments that once from the time art files are submitted to the printer until the finished game is shipped to the warehouse, you're averaging 15.59 weeks, which is like 4 months, 3 to 4.
Mhm.
So what is I mean, I'm assuming that sounds quick to me. Is that a quick turnaround?
I don't know. It seems so long to me just because by the time we send the art files off in my brain, we're like, ready, let's go. I want the game. And that's probably just from a, a Maypo gamer standpoint. Like I want it now, that it seems so long. But our printer has a really terrific team working on our behalf. And so in some sense, in some ways it seems like we're constantly back and forth with, I send the files, they acknowledge, Justin sends his art files over. They acknowledge we're constantly going back and forth. They do the proofs. We check the proofs. Everything's good to go. They assemble a white sample. They send it to me. I check it. We're still good to go. Um, and then we start getting color copies of things. Components start coming in. I get photos of dice, photos of any other small fiddly bits, wooden bits. Some games have card trays, all sorts of weird things that go into the box. And I'll start getting a bunch of photos of those. And it seems really quick, but if you look at it, that whole process takes about 3 months from when we start turning art files over to when they're actually packaging up and we're getting the advanced copies. And then it's just a month of, that's how long it takes to get across the Pacific. So that's the one that
Interesting.
kills me. They put it on the ship and then we wait. So it
So
just
you
takes forever.
mentioned you're the one who checks the components
Mhm,
and makes sure that everything is there. So now I know who to send an angry email to when I'm kidding.
mhm.
But what kind of system do you have for checking through all that stuff? And how many games are you what even period of time would I specifically ask for? Like how many games do you end up kind of proofing in this way at once or in short succession? What is your workflow like?
Okay, well, so first question. So I get a manifest from the art department that says, okay, here is the component list with all the details. I'll double check that with the developer if we have an on-staff developer for the game, and just say, does this list include everything you understand is going to be in the box, and are these descriptions accurate? And then once we've confirmed I've got all the right components, I put together the spec sheet that goes in for the printer to bid. Um, I run that back through Jason and Justin to make sure I've recorded it correctly so that we don't have any errors on my end. They look it over. Once we've got thumbs up from all three of us, that heads off. What was the second half of the question?
Oh, just how many games are you typically working on at once or in short succession?
Oh, okay. Right now I've got 13 at the printer,
Ooh.
and they come through usually one at a time, but I will sometimes get 1, 2, 3 in a week. Sometimes something will slip in over a weekend. Um, and so I just one at a time as they go through. But then when they're coming back from the printer, I'll get multiple white samples. They'll bundle games for me. I like to run our stuff through in small batches. I found it's more economic for us to do so because I can cut corners. That's not a right phrase. I can
You can
well, I can
streamline.
bundle things, yeah, to the safety testing. So if I send several games that have very similar components, they only have to run one set of tests. They don't have to test each game individually because they're all made from the same things. So if I can bundle
Mm.
like games, then it reduces our cost on safety testing because it then gets spread, that same test gets spread over several games. And so it'll reduce our costs. Same thing on shipping is if I can bundle more stuff into a 40-foot container or a 40-foot high cube, that's more economic for us than me packing a 20-foot container more often. So I'm trying to batch things for both those reasons as they go over. So yeah, I could see the spec sheets coming through individually, but then as the printer is sending me stuff, I've got a batch of white samples, a batch of advanced copies to check. Those come through anywhere from like 2 to 5 at a time.
How intimately do you know each individual game that's coming through? I know that you like to play in all the different departments, including development. But I mean, is that too many projects for you to personally know well, or are you playing everything?
You mean know the game?
The games themselves that you're checking, yeah.
Oh, I know beans about how to play most of the games. A lot of them don't, it's not my area of interest. I have been predominantly a World War II Europe war gamer through most of my gaming life. It wasn't until Chad passed that I started really branching out into other things because I was looking at solitaire systems all of a sudden, especially with COVID. My gaming group dissolved. So I'm having to look at different things, and getting away from World War II was less painful than trying to stay with the tried and true. So, but as far as playing what's coming down the development pike for us, I have not been hands-on with the majority of games. I know them component-wise. I know broad strokes what the games are about because I read the Discord channels. I stay in those conversations out of curiosity and partly because I miss the development work. I did it for 19 years and I got very abruptly cut off when Chad got sick, and so I went cold turkey. Basically, he cut my addiction. So, well, not you, just circumstances, and I got cut off. And so having a pipeline back into at least the chatter and the buzz that goes on behind the scenes is kind of grounding for me. So
Yeah.
I don't play most of the games. There are several that I have gone ahead and I sit in on tabletop or vassal sessions. I've got one right now that I just built a playtest kit so that I can work on a solitaire system here at home and just play through it and see how the system works. So very few of our products are ones that that have actually sat down and gamed, but because I do rules writing and editing and proofreading, all three, there are several rule books that I am very familiar with because I've been over them and over them to the point where I kind of internalized a lot of their language, but I've never actually played like Rebel Fury. I did a ton of editing on the rule book, but I've never actually played the game. I've had to, do what Chad used to call thought experiments and just kind of close my eyes, picture the board, move pieces around and follow the directions because I don't have the physical components with me. So, in that way, I've like dabbled in some games that I haven't actually ever sat down and played.
Oh, that's interesting. So when you're doing a check, you're really going off of that list.
For components, yes. Yeah. And from what I know of the game, so like if I know a game has a certain subset of special markers or wooden bits and stuff like that, I know from having listened to the chatter, read through the rule book, looked at the player aids and stuff like that, that I'm expecting to see those things on the component list. And if I don't, red flag, get a hold of somebody and find out what happened. Either somebody's rules needed updating, my component list is incomplete, somewhere we have a mismatch. So I'm on the lookout for that kind of thing, but I haven't caught anything major at this point. That would be an issue.
So what happens if there is an issue? Like how much does that actually back you up? So I know that people send a white sample and you get an advanced copy, but you hope nothing's wrong with that. But what if there is something wrong? Like what is the process for resolving that? I'm actually just curious because I feel like I'm just getting a peek behind the curtain here.
It's happened a few times, and last week was one of them. We had a reprint for,
Mm-mm.
well, it's all over the internet, no big deal. Here I stand. It's the anniversary edition, and it's the, what is it, fourth reprinting of this edition. Well, the last reprinting we did, there were some counters that were added in, but there was little notes of, okay, we don't need these because they're on the major sheets now, but they're not. And so there was just a misunderstanding of what was included, not included in, and I don't get a manifest of like, here's a counter sheet and here's what ought to be on a counter sheet. I don't get those kind of details. I get notes to say we have 5 counter sheets. That's as
Ooh.
much detail as I get. So I don't know what needs to be in that box, but because it's a reprint, the designer developer, one of the two of them should be in the conversation, and the art department should be in the conversation. And so these 5 little counters didn't make the cut. They didn't get in the box. So when it came back and it got spotted, we tried to put an immediate stop to shipping, but by that point, all the pre-orders have shipped out because our department is really fast at that stuff. They know gamers want to get their hands on them, so they fast-track those games out as quick as they can. So the P500 orders had gone out, but the distributor orders had not. So we locked that one down, said, okay, nothing goes out. We got a hold of the art department and got the new counters whipped up really quickly, double-checked them about 87 times, made sure front and back, and these are the right 5, and yes, we're all good. I got in touch with our printer and said, okay, I need this to skip to the top of the queue. This goes before everything else we have, and I need to air freight everything back to the warehouse. When you're done with it, how long does that take and how much does that cost? And they sped back all the details and said, okay, as soon as we have your files, we're on this. So Justin is shooting the files over. I'm shooting my bid request over. Paperwork is rolling, and we're going to have those counters back in about 2 weeks, which is just lightning fast for a printer to handle it. But because it's a small component, and we get to skip a lot because our safety testing is valid for 12 months, which means if we're using the same exact components and the same ink process and everything, nothing has changed, then the testing that we've already paid for covers this new run. So we get to skip the time and expense involved in that. I waive the white sample because there's no point in my looking at a little tiny white counter sheet. There's nothing there. I can count to 1. They can count to 1. I'm pretty sure they can handle that. So I'm waiving that whole process, and they're just going to send me a photo front and back for the advance check. And so we're streamlining that entire process, getting stuff to the warehouse, and our same crew that was so lightning fast at getting the initial games out is going to do that same thing again to get all the replacement parts out.
Nice.
It's a pain. We hate doing it, and it makes all of us grit our teeth because it's not the way we want the games to go out. But at least we have a process. So, if it does happen, we've got the shortest possible timeline to get it fixed. It's just we hate to see a game go out that you can't play.
That makes a lot of sense. So you're not the only one, I assume, who looks at the advanced copy. So you're counting the components, but when you get that advanced copy with like the full text, like the picture with everything, who all looks at that before it gets that like final green light?
We get 8 copies. One gets shipped directly to me. One gets shipped directly to Tony Curtis, who is our prior production coordinator. And the both of us go through the entire box. There's a copy goes to the designer because we need their input in case something's missing, or something went wrong. They're going to be better situated to notice that than we are. Like, it's really hard to spot something that's not there. So if something should have been in the box and wasn't, I'm not necessarily going to know it if my component list didn't contain it either.
Right.
But then the other principals of the company. So Gene, Mark Simonich, who else gets advanced copies? Andy Lewis, Rachel gets a copy for the marketing department so they can start doing their inside GMT stuff on it. If there's an in-house developer who did work on it, they're also in the loop. Same safety net as a designer, basically, because they've been intimately involved in it right up to the end. So so those copies go out, and everybody, it should be, busting a shrink wrap off, checking on those. I wait to hear from Tony and usually from the designer or developer if it's in-house, that their copies were good. Jason Carr gets a copy as head of development. Justin Martinez for the art. That's the other one. I go through mine literally page by page, card by card, with a ruler, with my PMS color chart, and double check literally everything. The color of the dice, the color of the numbers on the dice. I mean, everything. If we have specified, if it's not just stock black and white, I'm actually color matching everything from the spec sheet to what they have sent. And I go through page by page of every booklet. I measure every map, even though a 22 by 34 map, I mean, I measure them anyway. You never know. So.
Oh, that's really interesting. So you mentioned that with Here I Stand, there was an issue because by the time the error was spotted, the P500 copies were already going out. So it sounds like you have this really elaborate check process, but also like that print timeline is so fast that sometimes there's like an overlap between things getting a final check and things going out. Is that because Here I Stand was a reprint and everybody just trusted it? Or is there always like a weird leap of faith, even with a new game?
Part of that was I I don't know what the process is for how we used to handle a reprint, because it's the same art files, right? You pull it up, you put X printing on there. It's the third printing, fourth printing. You update that. You update the copyright. We change the stock number to indicate the year of the reprint.
Right.
So it's a couple little changes like that, and then all the rest of the files stay the same. You send them. So I think there's always been a trust of, unless we had errata that had to get fixed, that the files you had last time should be good to go. So I'm assuming that's what happened in this case. Was that we were like, okay, we had this thing, but we had 5 counters, but there's a note that says we don't need those 5 counters. Um, so I think it was just a little miscommunication. It was actually handwritten on the counter sheet that I saw,
Ah, I got you.
that somebody had said from the last printing, we went, okay, now we don't need those. So when we did the reprint, saw the note, oh, we don't need those. So I'm assuming that's why they didn't get in the box. Human error. What Jason and Justin and I are trying to do is come up with an actual system, like a checklist of certain items that, because our names are going on the box, the 3 of us want to be sure that we have gone through this entire process to make sure that there wasn't something else that needed to happen before we send those files. Because once the printer starts rolling, once they start moving on stuff, it goes quick in some sense, and there is an overlap of when things are happening. So when they do the advanced copies, that's just the first 8 that are coming off the line. But while they're even pulling those off and boxing them up, the next 9, 10, they're all coming off the line. That process doesn't stop and wait for us to double check these boxes. By the time we have gotten them from overseas shipping and gotten a chance to open them up and actually check through them, the entire rest of the print run has happened. So unless something has gone catastrophically wrong, then those games are already ready to collate and go. And I don't actually know if they hold collating until they hear from us, or if they're actually starting that process even. We have had several months ago, we had some cards that came through that I was checking the backs on. Fronts of the cards all look fabulous. The back of the cards, there were 4 of them that stood out in the deck, and I could consistently pull them out of the deck. I knew exactly which 4 cards they were. I'm like, these are marked. I'm not taking them. Then I have to stop the whole process and say, okay, don't collate and ship. We can't move forward with this. You're going to have to pull those 4 cards out of every single copy of the game. And I need 4 new cards that match the existing decks, printed and put back in. So they have to stop everything they're doing, and they've got to pull all, and the decks are shrink wrapped by that point. They've got to pull them out. They got to go find those 4 cards, pull those out. They've got to reprint enough of them to put back in, which means somebody has to make sure they get the right 4 back in the next set, re-shrink wrap, rebox everything. But they do it because that's what their job is. So it can happen. I've had to stop a print run, but it's a rare thing because our printer is really good.
Awesome. What kinds of changes? I mean, you mentioned that you got kind of a new guard slowly coming in to lead GMT. What kinds of changes have y'all been making since you took your position as chief of awesomeness? And what are some ones that are still under discussion, if you feel comfortable talking about it?
For my process, see, I don't know what Tony's full process was because he's been doing it for eons. I'm assuming most of it's just up in his head. I don't work that way. I'm a checklist kind of person. And because after my husband passed, I had a brain injury that I had to recover from, simply from the trauma of him passing. And so I, for a year and a half, did not trust my memory at all. And so I was like strictly on checklists. I would like write a shopping list and take it with me, where I used to just have a shopping list that stayed on the side of the fridge and I would glance at it and then go shopping. And during this time period after Chad passed, I had to take the list with me in order to be sure that I was getting what I was after, because my brain was just not working right. So since then, I use checklists as a backup. So I've actually got, can I reach it? I can reach it. So that's my 13 games that are at the printer right now. I've got a checklist for all the steps that have to happen for each one of these. And so I make sure, as we're running through the printing process, that I'm checking all the boxes. Jason, I don't know how he runs what he does. That's a very fluid, and every game is different. So Lord knows how he keeps track of all that stuff in his head. But for my process, it's really simple. I have a checklist, and it covers everything. And so I literally have things on my checklist that don't even apply to every game. They apply to some games. It's all on the list, and I just cross off where it doesn't apply, just to make sure that I've covered all those bases. And I do that for every step of the way. So I've got my printer process, I've got my shipping process. So once the printer has cartoned everything up, gotten it into my 40-foot container, and it's getting ready to go on the boat, I've got a separate checklist of what has to happen from that point till when it gets to the warehouse, of all the different things that I have to go through with our shipper, the carrier, the port facilities, the trucking company, setting up all those transfers all the way across until it lands on our dock. And so that's a whole separate, for me, a checklist. Yeah, there's no way I'm going to trust that I'm hitting all those steps without backup.
This is so interesting to me. So the safety testing is still just, I'm just going to think about that for a while because I'd never thought of it. What other parts of production coordination did you find maybe surprising as somebody who is on the other end of making games for so long that you think that people might want to hear about?
Oh, that people want to hear about? Probably not much. Stuff that I geek out on?
I want to hear about it. Yeah.
Like the first time I got a white sample, he said, okay, you're getting a white sample. And I'm like, okay, great. I have no idea what that means. He says, you'll see it when you get it. Shows up. It is literally, it's a white box. It's a box. It's got a list of what's going to be on there. If I open this box up, here's a rule book. That's my rule book. There's not a thing on here. Every single page is
literally
blank.
just a blank.
It's literally a blank rule book. I have to check and make sure it's the right size. Is it 8.5 by 11? I measure it. Is it saddle stitch, which means is it stapled down the middle? So I check, do we have staples? I count the number of pages to be sure it's the right number of pages that I asked for. And I check for the coating on it to make sure that it's the right kind of paper. It's got the right kind of coating, because this is coded differently than a player aid, which is coded differently than the counter sheets. So I'm checking the surface coating on all that stuff. Maps, they send me dice. They send me a bag of baggies, and I have to count and make sure all the right number of baggies are in there. I mean, I sit with a ruler, and I've got a little tiny ruler with millimeters, and I measure every die. I measure the cubes. I measure, if I've got 250 cubes, I'll pull one, measure it, and then I just line all the other ones up against it. If they're all about the same, then I know we've got the right size. But I do measure minimum one of everything out of the box to make sure that they're hitting the exact specs, because I don't want them kind of straying. If they start straying a little bit now, they stray a little bit further a year from now, 3 years from now, we could be getting completely wrong sizes. If I don't check, and if their suppliers were prone to, because our printer doesn't do all the components, they source out all the wooden components, the dice, the extra little fiddly bits. So, yes, I trust our printer, but then means I have to trust who they trust instead. That becomes one of those, I've kissed who you kissed kind of a thing. I double check. I'm double checking everything.
Oh, that is fascinating.
So, yeah. So that's what a white sample is all about. And yeah, I go through literally all the components, but they're all blank, the whole box. And I get one of those for every game. And I have a whole stack of them sitting right behind me.
That's kind of awesome, actually. So you've been doing so much cool stuff with production. Like, this actually sounds like a super interesting job, and one that I'm sure everyone appreciates, because we have been enjoying our beautiful GMT games. But do you think, you mentioned you dabble a bit in development. Do you kind of want to move back in that direction eventually, or are you not sure yet?
No, because I love the production end of things and the data collection. And I don't know, I just geek out on the spreadsheets and my pivot tables and my charts and I love that aspect of it. And being able to take all that data and make it useful to the rest of the team is kind of a happy place for me. Like, I know exactly how long during any part of the process. I keep track of all of our average times, the average costs of the different things that we do. I keep track of the actual cost. So if the guys are like, okay, well, I've got X number of components, about how much is that going to add if we want to add stuff, I can tell them, down to the dollar of how much it's going to add on a P500 price, how much that'll add to the retail price, so they can take a look at, is it something we can actually squeeze into the box, or do we have to say no and just keep it constrained? I've got designers who are calling me like, it's not on P500 now, but before we get to that point, I've got a decision point here and I need to know which way to jump. What's the difference in pricing if I go this versus that? And I can provide that kind of data. And I love that part of the job. So yeah, tracking inventory, not a real exciting job for most people. It's a happy place for me. So yeah, I would never want to get full-time back into just development because much as I love it, now that I've got a little bit of everything, that would be limiting myself. So nope, I'm in my right place.
I like it. So, I will ask, you work on games. Hopefully some games are currently bringing you joy. So what are you playing right now that just personally makes you happy?
Combat Commander. I'm right back to the beginning. I recently joined the ladder. We're working on several new additions. So some new battle pack stuff, several different products going on behind the scenes right now, one of which is on P500, the island hopping by a friend of mine. And so getting back into that. It was a game that Chad and I always kept saying, oh, we should sit down and play again because it had a special place for both of us. And it's just darn fun to play. And it's quick compared to some of the other games that we played. Like if I put Totaler Krieg on the table, we're not just knocking that out in an evening, but Combat Commander, we could sit down and play 2-3 games of in a night. So we always talked about it, but then we're like, shoot, if we have free time to be goofing off and playing a game, we should be working on design because he always had something new in the hopper. He always had like 6 games going at a time. So we're like, shoot, if we've got this kind of time, we really ought to go work on something else. So we very rarely played it, but we always kind of jonesed for it at the same time. And now I've got free time, evenings, weekends. If I'm not working and I do some crazy art projects. I'm part of an art abandonment group. So I like make things and drop them out in the wild for people. So if I'm not doing that, I've got to fill the hours somehow, right? There's only so many books to read and I don't watch TV. So yeah, back into gaming, and Combat Commander is top of my list. Fighting Formations should be second because I've got to finish up the 29th Infantry edition, which I'm going to have done in probably a month or two, and get that off to the printer. But yeah, every time I turn around, I wake up in the morning, I think, oh, do I have time to play Combat Commander today? So yeah, I'm like currently obsessed, and I'm not sure why, but I'm taking advantage of it.
Hey, why not? Also, since you say you read a lot, I'm always just curious. What books recently have been bringing you some joy?
Oh, I got curious about Volko's new game on the Coast Watchers. So I went on his Discord channel and bugged him for reading material, and I read the 2 books, Coast Watchers and The Lonely Vigil, that he recommended, and they're absolutely fascinating. Found them both very interesting reads. So now I'm looking for a documentary to go with that because I don't do TV, but I'll do documentaries any day of the week. What else am I reading? I've got The Marshall Plan. I've got, I think it's a McCullough biography on Truman. And then I've got another one on Bull Halsey that I'm plowing through. So, but those are like, those big massive tomes where you're going to be reading that for a couple months.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like great way to pass the time, honestly.
Yep.
To my chagrin, I've been picking up a bunch of books about homing pigeons because David and I are making our second game right now, and it's about uh, managing a spy network. And one of the scenarios that we've come up with is about getting pigeons and training them and then getting intelligence back from them. And so, I mean, it's just kind of abstracted in the game. But unfortunately, I've become fascinated with pigeons. So I just keep reading about like war pigeons and how you train pigeons. Like, do I have at a home, like a house? No, I do not. Am I ever going to get pigeons? My boyfriend might kill me. But
But it's so easy to go down that rabbit hole, though, isn't it?
yeah,
You like find one obscure little thing and you're like, wow. I read, I just forgot his first name. Leo? I think it's Leo Marx. I was the head of British intelligence for the cryptographers in World War II. And he wrote a fascinating little book called Between Silk and Cyanide. And it's
Ooh.
on it's the title alone caught my
title.
eye. I bought the book because of the title, and then I looked at it and went, what the heck did I just get? and he's very, very British, but very fabulous sense of humor, and mildly self-deprecating, that very, very British style. And it just talks about how he started out and like tried to get into Bletchley Park and failed. They ran him through an exam at the cryptography department where they said, okay, just decrypt this thing. Shouldn't take you very long at all. He's sitting in there, lunch rolls around. They're like, hey, do you want to take a break for lunch? He goes, no, 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 I got this. I'm going to finish this. End of the day. And the guys are like, hey, we need to close the office. And he's like, I'm almost done. I'm almost done. So like, okay, fine. So a few minutes after 5, and he like walks up to the office, like hanging his head with his paperwork. And he's like, okay, fine. I decrypted it. I know it took me too long. It's hours and hours, but I did it. There you go. And they're like, okay, well, thanks. Give us back the code books that you worked from, and we'll just call it a day. And he's like, code books? You didn't give me any code books. All they gave him was the code. He spent all day cracking it from nothing. They hired him on the spot and made him head of the department. And that was the beginning of his work with cryptography, and the entire rest of the book, and it's another fat little book, is absolutely fabulous. And he gets down into the weeds on crypting, on decrypting, on the materials they would put stuff on. He's the one who developed the photo on silk, so that if you got patted down in the street by Gestapo or something, paper will crinkle. Paper is tangible and audible. Silk is not. And so that was one of his ideas. I know. So, and you could like tear off a strip and burn it. So for each code you use, you just tear that one off, you burn it, you're done. You're not using that code again. And it's untraceable at that point. And stuff. So this genius guy, absolutely amazing book. Totally down the rabbit hole on that. And I went into cryptography for like 4 months. Same thing
I know
with
what
you
I'm
and your
reading
pigeons.
During state testing now.
Oh, I absolutely recommend it. It's one of those books that I will not get rid of. Usually I'll recycle books pretty quickly. This one I'm keeping. I'm reading it again.
Oh, that's
absolutely
awesome.
I was sure there was a game in there, but so far all I've come up with is an activity, not a game.
Yeah. So. Oh, that's interesting. That's got me thinking that too. But I will just ask one more softy question before we call the interview to a close, which is, if people want to track your work online, where, if anywhere, do you like to be found?
My work online. I don't post my work online. I chatter on Facebook, but if it's something that's like behind the scenes, I do it kind of at an oblique angle. I won't name drop titles or designers or anything like that. I just say, hey, I'm working on a fun rule book. Can't wait for you guys to see it. But I don't really talk too much about it because most of my stuff is behind the scenes. And I'm always afraid of being a blabbermouth. And I actually outed one of my own programs or one project because I talk too much. So I was chatting with the guys from Players Aid over dinner, and we were all geeking out about Combat Commander stuff because we're all fans. And another designer was with us at dinner, and he was also a Combat Commander fan. So I kind of forgot who I was talking to. And I outed one of my own behind the scenes projects just because I was so excited to talk to people who knew the system. And then because I forgot who I was talking to, I didn't tell them, oh, by the way, that's secret. So the next time the guys went and posted stuff to their blog, they were like, oh, we found out about this great thing. And I'm like, oh, that was me. Crap. I wasn't supposed to talk about that, but it's my own project. So at least it wasn't bad. But
yeah, you can trust us all. We're only media.
Yeah. But I forget that sometimes because I'm like, no, I was out to dinner with friends. I was thinking of them as like they're my friends and they're fans of the game, so we can chat about it. And I just forgot. So now I try to be a little more circumspect.
So we'll allow you to remain a woman of mystery. But if y'all have questions, I, of course, am everywhere online as Beyond Solitaire. Kai, thank you so much for coming on. This is an awesome conversation. I feel like I learned a lot. This is great. Thank you.
You're welcome. I told you I'd ramble.
No, this is all good. All to the good. All right. So for those of you out there, please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.